On. Hello and welcome to Leading Teams in the Digital Age and to this very first module. This week we'll get some time to explore how to create effective teams together. We'll have time to really look at different approaches and different ways of working towards that goal. You've probably been into the learning kit for this week, and there you can find a lot of different theories and models and different ways of approaching this topic. So, but I'm also really happy to introduce today's guest who will help us dig even deeper into it and really get our hands dirty. Hello, Max.
Hello, Johanna.
Welcome.
Great to be here with everybody.
You might recognize Max from the welcome kit, actually, one of the pictures. So who are you, Max?
Yeah, so I'm, as well as the role that I'm doing now, which is heading up the online courses at Hyper Island, I've been working here for the last 5 years in a variety of roles related to a lot of our master's education, and primarily working with people and with teams. I've got a couple of pictures here I can show you of some of the teams I've been working with. So you'll see there some of our master students in Manchester, in Stockholm, and indeed in London. And I've spent a lot of time with hundreds of postgraduate students, professionals working at all different stages of their career, trying to help them figure out things to do with digital management and digital experience design, and actually understanding that underneath all of that, it's really about understanding people. How do you work with each other to collaborate effectively? Because that's how you navigate complex changes and shifts in the world and in work. So I've been doing that for 5 years at Hyper Island, and up until recently I've been running some of the online courses, such as this one as well. But I've moved into this role now looking after the business area. So I've come back to work with Johanna on delivering some content, which is great, because I've not had much chance to do that on these courses before. And in terms of the topic we're going to look at today, I mean, if I look back at my career, I think much of my career has focused on leading projects or leading teams in one way or another. And it's really interesting when I reflect on the teams I felt are kind of really going great and accelerating and flying high, and the teams that are maybe doing less so, and the times that teams go through those stages. And you can see that kind of when teams are disengaged in a project, or they're saying they're feeling confused, they don't really know what to do, and they have lots of questions of whether they want to be in the team or not, and things like that. You can see that there are times when it's quite tough and challenging, and then other times when there's lots of frustrations in the air, or kind of conflicts are coming up, and it's very draining. It takes a lot of energy when people are questioning you as the leader of a team. It can be really exhausting. And then other times when things are just flowing great, and it's the best team ever, and you're so proud of each other, and there's lots of high fives and celebrations and things like that. And if I think of the teams I've been in, I mean, I've been in all of those situations multiple times, and sometimes it can be really difficult to actually work out, well, why? Like, why at this moment in this team were things going so great, and why at this moment in this team were things just awful, just frustrating and horrible? It's really complex, and it's really challenging, and actually it's quite interesting that this pattern of behaviors, these kind of outcomes of teamwork, are much more predictable than we might think. There's ways that we can understand and analyze where a team's at. So what I'm going to go through today is a model that's helped me a lot when it comes to understanding this process of working in teams, and is something I often go back to help me if I'm kind of unsure about something, or I've got to work things out. Then this is a useful model to go back to think, okay, so where is the team at this point in time, and how do I need to act within the team to support it to become a high-performing team? So this is Susan Whelan's model, which we call the integrative, or she calls the integrative model of group development. And on our next slide, you can see the kind of different stages that you go through within that team, within that development process. And we're going to take a look at these in a bit more depth. And just to give you a bit more background on it, so Susan Whelan's a US psychology professor. Since the 70s, she's been working on developing this model, so researching teams and trying to understand how they work together and the way they relate to each other. And she's also been collecting research existing research from the many of the different team development models that are out there. Some of the more common ones, might be things like forming, storming, norming, and performing. So she's looked at that existing research. She's actually looked at hundreds, if not thousands, of teams herself, and she put together this model based on it. And it describes 4 sort of stages that the teams go through during their development, and then a kind of final stage, which is more of the closing of the team that we will go through in a moment. And in definition, this is when a group or a team that's working together has kind of common goals and tasks, and they meet regularly. So it's about a team working on a given project or business area or whatever it might be, but who are working together for a period of time. And this is a model that helps to understand that. So the first stage is called dependency and inclusion. And you can see on this next slide that some of the characteristics that we see in that first stage. So this is something that sometimes we talk about at Hyper Island being like the cocktail party. It's when people come together for the first time and they're kind of getting to know each other, and there's maybe quite a lot of small talk. And so you see that people are quite tentative and polite, and they're quite concerned about being liked. They don't want to be the odd one out in the group or the one who's kind of disrupting things. There's not really any conflicts happening. People don't really take much personal risks. They want to kind of play it safe and be calm. And there's a lot of dependency on the leader. They're looking to the leader for answers and for instruction and for guidance. And probably asking themselves a bit, do I want to be a part of this team? Is this the right team for me? Is it the right fit? Do I get on with the people here? So it's quite a light stage in terms of where the team are at, and it's a stage of getting to know each other and understand each other. And there's various things that you can think about in terms of leadership at stage 1, and also in terms of what you do as a group. So when you think about leaders and how leaders can support a stage 1 team, then they need to help the members of the team to feel included and to feel safe. Because they might have lots of questions and questioning themselves and each other. So to help them feel safe as part of the team. To be quite directive and confident and organized. So people want to know stuff. They want information. They want to understand what it is they're supposed to do and by when and how and things like that. So the leader needs to give that structure and that safety. And then to start to facilitate some more open discussions around goals or values, like norms, what's the way characteristics of behaviors that they're going to work together, and what the roles are. So actually to get some discussions going around those things to help the team open up and to form some opinions about those kind of things. And as a group at this stage, then they can support each other by sharing and asking questions to each other, both about who they are as people and also what it is they're doing. Sharing their own goals and their experience at work. And also offering to take responsibility. So rather than waiting to be asked to do something, kind of stepping up and taking some personal responsibility for it. And it's often quite a nice stage to be in, I would say, stage 1. It's quite light and it's interesting getting to know each other. But you spend very little time focusing on work when you're in stage 1, because a lot of your time is focused on the interpersonal relationships between each other. So in terms of creating highly effective collaborative teams, it's not a great stage to be in, because you're focusing a lot of the energy that could be spent on achieving whatever it is your team is trying to achieve. You're focusing that instead on actually how you're working together, the interpersonal relationships between each other. But if we move on to stage 2, then that's where it starts to get really interesting in this model, I think. And that's a stage we call counterdependency and fight. And in this stage, we see that team members are starting to kind of rock the boat a bit and starting to challenge each other and to challenge the leader and to jostle for position a bit. And that image on the screen of kind of stags sort of butting heads together, that can be quite a common feeling in teams. I don't think that actually, I don't think it looks like that, but I think it can feel like that sometimes. So some of the characteristics you'll see is that people might attempt to free themselves from dependency of the leader. They'll challenge the leader and maybe go against them, or challenge other members of the group. They'll form small subgroups. So you might see them breaking off into little cliques or small subgroups where they're not so bothered about the bigger team or the bigger group they're in, but they're more concerned about the small group of 3 or 4 people they're in. There's a lot of jostling in terms of trying to convince each other of whose views are the right ones. So it's not so much about sharing and collaborating, but more about sharing and then trying to get everybody to follow you and believe what it is you want to do. And they often avoid kind of real conflicts by running away to irrelevant activities. So rather than really locking horns, you might find there's times when people just dismiss it and go away and do something else just so they don't have to deal with the challenge that might come from that. And if we look at what leaders need to do at this stage, then it's really about not trying to jump in too much and supporting the group to do things themselves. So thinking about how can the group, or helping the group to resolve conflicts about what their goals or roles are and around leadership. Supporting and coaching and facilitating collaboration. So rather than telling people what to do or how to do it, it's encouraging the team itself to take those actions and behaviors themselves. And to try as much as you can not to take attacks or challenges personally. It can feel really personal when you're the leader of a team and they're in this stage and you feel on the firing line. But to try and remember that this is just a natural part of team development, and it's part of your job as a leader, I suppose, to sort of take that to support the team to move through that stage. And then when you think about groups at that stage, how they can support each other is to see conflicts as actually an opportunity for development, that they're not something to run away from, but something to use and to use effectively and to learn from. To support constructive conflict resolution. So it's not necessarily about arguing who's right and somebody winning. It's more about, well, how do we use those different opinions to find a common ground or a common resolution that everyone can buy into. And also being really specific and clear. Quite a lot of the conflicts and misunderstandings can come from communications not being clear. People not actually saying what they think or saying things in a clear way. So trying to focus on saying things and acting in ways that that make it very obvious and clear to everybody else supports the team as well. Any perspectives from you, Johanna, for these first couple of stages from your own experiences?
Yeah, I'm thinking a lot about the see conflicts as a development. I think that it's so easy for a team to also, when it gets a little bit heated and people have different opinions and there's a little bit of conflict, to want to go back to that stage one. It's so nice and quiet and the mingling feeling again a little bit. But to really stick with it and feel like we need to get through it, because what's on the other side is really nice. And also, conflict sounds like such a big word. It can also be something that's more a little bit under the surface. But also, I think it's quite tricky to be a leader in this situation, because you're also being challenged at the same time, right? So solve this. There's a conflict. You need to fix this. To then sort of hold your horses a little bit and step back and just be a support.
Yeah. And that's what I've seen many times and worked with many teams they've kind of got to this stage where things are difficult. Basically, it feels tough working together. And sometimes the leadership in that situation can feel like, okay, now we need strong leadership and we need to step in and really help sort this team out. But actually that can do exactly what you just said and push the team back into stage one, because instead of finding ways through the challenges, they just avoid the challenges altogether and go back to just being nice to each other, because that felt easier. That felt less stressful each day and less challenging each day. So yeah, this jumping between stages is something that can be very common and is very is affected a lot by what the leadership style is, which we'll talk a bit more about in a moment, and also members of the team changing and other kind of variables that have an impact on how far the team's developed.
It's important, because I also get that question a lot. But if it's so nice in step one, why don't we just stay there? Why do we have to move up? But it's just that part, as you said before as well. Remember that it's not very effective. It's maybe 20% of your capacity going to the task.
Yeah. If you want to make the most of the people that work for you, then keeping them in stage one is not the way to do that. You probably need twice as many people just to get a similar amount of work done. And it's not necessarily the most fulfilling experience for them either, so they might not hang around for that long. But if we push through stage 3, if we find ways to work together and to collaborate well, then we move more into trust and structure. And trust and structure is where you start to see this real kind of shift in the way the team's working together and approaching each other. So there's a lot more trust and openness being kind of displayed. People talk more openly about themselves and each other, and that leads to more trust. And then the more trusting they are, the more open they can be. So it's a really nice kind of cycle that gets into. There's a lot more focus on objectives and tasks. So less of the energy is kind of wasted on jostling for position and understanding your place in the team. And it's actually on what the team is there to do, the objectives and tasks that the team and individuals have within the team. Conflicts are handled more as they arise. So when a conflict happens, it's kind of dealt with and moved on from, rather than something that can lay under the skin of people and kind of erupt after a while, which can happen in stage 2 quite often. And the team looks for consensus solutions. So it's not necessarily about, you'll see quite a lot in the earlier stages, voting. So, okay, let's have a vote. Okay, that's got the most votes, we'll do that thing. But when you get to stage 3 and you're better able to collaborate together, then you see more kind of consensus solutions, where it's not that the majority has decided one way, it's that everybody agrees this is the way. But that's because they've been able to come to an agreement that, okay, even people who originally thought a different way was the way to go, that they're on board with the rationale behind this way, and they're supporting that to happen. And you see quite a strong group identity start to develop in stage 3. You know, when you've been in teams and you kind of think, oh, you know, we're the best, we're the best team in this organization, or we're the best team in this department, or whatever it might be. You start to get that sense of pride, and people kind of, you know, stand up a bit straighter and puff their shoulders out a bit and their chest out a bit, and they kind of, they feel a real sense of pride and belonging with the team there. So it's actually, you know, it's a really nice time to be in, a nice stage to be in. And for a leader in this stage, then you've got quite a different approach to what it is you need to do. So you need to delegate more responsibilities to the team members. So rather than kind of telling people what to do, you're giving them ownership of things, and they're making decisions themselves and working out how to do it themselves. That you're encouraging people to develop their own initiatives and to take their own responsibilities for things. So you're not giving the answer to everything, and you're not necessarily trying to solve everything. You're letting other people step into that space and do it as well. And actually, you start to challenge the team more at this stage. You're challenging them in the way they're working together and coaching them to actually progress and move the team forward. And for the team at this stage, the ways you can support each other are to not just kind of settle on, okay, this is a much better stage we're in now, so let's stay here, but to really focus on doing and continuing to progress and develop. To use feedback and to be really generous with feedback, so giving each other lots of feedback in order to really understand and develop your relationships and the way you're working together. And to try and be as open as possible for new thoughts or new ideas or new ways of working. So to not just accept that, okay, this is how we've always done it, so we'll keep doing it this way, but to be constantly learning and looking for ways to enhance things and develop things and tweak things a bit further. Because if you do that, then you can move into stage 4, which is performance and productivity. And at performance and productivity, this is where the team members are collaborating, you know, highly effectively, and nearly all of the team's energy goes into work. The team can never have 100% of energy in work, because always some time and energy is needed towards how you're working together, as we've seen in the kind of content process model in the learning kit. But at this point, the vast majority of the team's energy and capacity and kind of headspace is focused on the work they're doing rather than how they're working together. And they see that those tasks are the responsibility of a group rather than individuals. So it's not like Johanna has her things to do and I have my things to do. It's more like we have these things to do, and Johanna might have some actions and I might have some. But if she can't fulfill them for any reason or something happens, then I see it as just as much my responsibility to make sure they're done rather than waiting for Johanna to come back and do them herself. And conflicts are super normal and very valuable at this stage, and they're handled really effectively. So they're a really great learning tool. And there's a lot of trust, high levels of trust and high levels of openness. That's just kind of increased since the last stage. And it's quite rare, or not so much rare, but it's quite difficult for teams to get to this stage. It takes working together for a period of time and kind of consistently working together to really develop this way of working. And in our modern working culture, working together in the same group of people over a long period of time doesn't always happen that often. It can be lots of smaller kind of project-based work. So I think like my belief is it's getting harder and harder to find this stage of development, because of the fact that we're shifting around quite often from one project to a next, and different constellations of teams and people coming in and people leaving, and that makes it hard to develop further. But as a leader in this stage, you're kind of building on what you did in stage 3. So you're really kind of delegating more and focusing on the future vision and further development. So what's the team look like in, what do the things the team's working on look like in weeks, months, years time, and how do we develop to achieve those things? That you're letting whoever's the most suitable person lead different tasks or different parts of the responsibilities rather than trying to hold on to stuff yourself. And that you're really encouraging and empowering people. There's a lot of self-management within the team, and people kind of organize themselves, and you don't need to coordinate them in quite the same way as you did in some of the earlier stages. And with groups, what you see is that they're taking an even greater personal responsibility. So to encourage people to take more responsibility of things themselves, to experiment a bit and try new ways out and explore and develop things, to work more consciously, to try kind of new thoughts or new emotions or new behaviors. So from the feedback you've been receiving, actually, how do you take that on board and try things out to see what the impact of that is and how that supports the team? And it's an interesting stage. I think it's one that not that many people get to experience that often, or maybe not for that long a period of time. So it's a fascinating stage to be in.
Have you experienced it?
I think I have. I feel like I have from knowing this model and from the work I've been doing over the various years. There's definitely teams where I've felt some of these things. But like I mentioned before, I think my work challenge is probably similar to many people's work challenges. A lot of change between different constellations of teams and different smaller project teams within a wider organization. And Susan's research suggests, I believe, that it takes about 6 months of kind of consistently working together as a minimum to get through to stage 4. And so that's 6 months of not just working together, but being aware of this model and being aware of the leadership that's needed and being aware of the things you can do to support you to develop through the model. And I think that most people probably aren't aware of all this stuff, or if they are, they don't apply it that actively. So I think it makes it quite difficult to get to this stage, or certainly more challenging to get to this stage.
And difficult to stay there. Sorry.
Yeah. Have you been in this stage?
Yes, I've been lucky to be there twice. The first one, I think, at least, and then once here at the team at Hyper Island. So we worked together for over a year, so we had the time, and also a lot of awareness, like you say, of the content and process model from the learning kit this week. With how do I work and what do we do? But then it's the painful thing that, just as you can go from stage 2 back to stage 1, you can also go from 4 to 3 to 2. So we were at stage 4, but went down to stage 2 also, with the members changing and all of the time and all the changes that happen. So it's just a constant working in a good way to make sure that you be able to stay there.
And that's what she talks about in her research as well, that if more than 50% of the team change in terms of who's in the team, then the whole team's back at stage 1. And although, if you and I had been working together, maybe our relation might still be at stage 4, the way we work together, the team as a unit is back at stage 1 because it needs to build all of those things all over again. And, maybe it can develop more quickly because half of the team, let's say, or a percentage of the team have been working really effectively together. But who knows, because every human's different. And that's what's so fascinating about this stuff when we're trying to work together and be effective teams and collaborate and lead teams, that every different person with their different personality and their different approaches can really disrupt a team or can really help to gel and bond a team and make them work effectively. And you just don't know that until you have the group of people together. So, and like you said, we know this model pretty well and we've been working with it for many years, but when you ask me and when I ask you, have you been in this stage? It's like, well, I think we have. I think I have once or twice. So none of this stuff is fixed. It's not like, okay, check, now we're in stage 4. Just it's a feeling, but it's a feeling based on the things that are happening around you and the characteristics you're seeing and the behaviors you're seeing. And I think for me, it's important that it is a feeling, because so much of this is connected to us as human beings. And if we understand how the actions and behaviors of ourselves and others make us feel, then we can understand, well, when am I feeling good? And when I'm feeling good, that's probably when the team is feeling good. And when the team's feeling good, that's probably because we've developed and we're working more effectively together. So it's very hard to separate this from emotions and kind of human feelings. It's not just a rational thing. It's very much an emotive thing.
I really want to highlight that as well, because I mean, Susan Whelan has a test that you can do, like, are you a team 4 or not? And we did that test and we were a team 4. And the moment that we got that number was also when we started slipping, because I was like, we made it. We're here. We can relax. So it's also the feeling of it is so much more important, because a test can't say, I would say, if it is. But the feeling can definitely. And the feeling of being a really effective team, it's hard to beat. And it's, if you've once been there, I think that, or for me at least, it's, you know that it's worth all of the hard work. So you don't want to settle with less after that.
No, definitely not. And you know, the tests and things, I think they're really useful, but they only take you at that snapshot in time. And, you know, 2 days later, it can be completely different. So it's very hard to, you need to keep working on sustaining where you are, not just kind of celebrating that you got to that point. Yeah. And this stuff's super important, because it's not just about how you feel at work and how you work together and things, but it's also about, at the bottom line, it's also about the business, like the return on investment of the people that you're employing. If you really invest in your people and you really support them to develop, to work together well, not only are you getting much more for your money in terms of the salaries and things you're paying, because people are really performing and focusing on performing rather than focusing on how they're working together. But you're also getting more happy employees. People are more satisfied and more fulfilled in their work, and they don't want to leave the organization because they have a good feeling about being there. You know, the culture and the way they're working and everything else makes them want to be there. So it's really important for both, you know, making the most of the money you spend on people, which is probably one of the most important resources most organizations have these days, in fact, any day. And also, focusing on like getting the work done and actually achieving things and taking the company further forward, and not having to replace people who are leaving all the time because they're not happy with the team and they're not happy with the way they're working. So this is not just kind of like happy, wishy-washy, feel-good stuff. This is real kind of business, of real business importance, and that's kind of crucial to consider and understand and use as part of that. So the final stage, stage 5, is a slightly different stage, and this is one that Susan Whelan calls termination. And this is where the team is closed, basically. So let's say you've been working together for 6 months on a particular project, and then that project finishes. And this is a way for that team to get a sense of closure on the project, and to learn from the experience, having been able to reflect on the whole experience rather than just what they've been doing most recently. So teams at this stage need that kind of sense of closure. It's not just a goodbye drink and things like that and then go their separate ways. It's a chance to really close that moment of time they've been working together. They need to give and receive feedback to each other to really make sure they're taking learnings from that experience. And they may, when they're going into whatever new team constellation they're going to be in after that point, or other team constellations they're working in, then they may need to kind of get ready for the fact that they might be in lower stages within those teams, and maybe experience a sense of loss. So termination is a way to help kind of take context of that and prepare for the next team constellation they're being in and learn things from it so they can take that through to the next one. So it's quite an important part of getting a closure. And often companies do this in some kind of project wrap up or debrief or critique or whatever it might be. People use lots of different terms, but this is much more focused on like the way the team's been working together rather than necessarily what the team has achieved, which is a very important part of it. And in this stage, on the next slide, you can see that the leaders need to kind of facilitate processes that support evaluation to happen and reflection and feedback, as well as celebration and closure. So it's the leader's responsibility to kind of help make sure that happens, and to make sure that the team's taking learning and wisdom forward. So what have you learned from this team experience? How do you take that forward? How do you apply that in your next team? How do you support the next team you're in to do things like that? And for groups themselves at this stage, then for them it's to reflect and evaluate and collect those learnings, to give the feedback like we've mentioned, And performing things like ceremonies, like kind of we do things at Hyper Island around check-ins and checkouts and little celebration events and different ways of giving feedback, which you'll see later in this course. And doing things like that and actually having that real sense of closure is an important part of being able to understand that moment in time you've been working together and being able to take positive things and positive learnings through to the next thing that you're working on. So that's the kind of the stages in a bit more detail. But just for a moment, I'd like to talk a little bit about situational leadership. And we've kind of touched on it within each of the stages. I think here's a way of looking at it, which really helps to understand the challenge that we as leaders, or anybody as leaders, faces in working with people. So if you look at the stages here, we've got them from stages 1 to 4, going up the ladder. And the different levels of leadership or different approach to leadership you need at each stage is what this is going to look at. So in stage 1, dependency and inclusion, we talked about it being very much about instructional type leadership. It's not necessarily telling people what to do, but it's giving them safety by making it clear kind of, what tasks you want them to do, or what their responsibilities are, or what you want them to focus on, and what their role is in relation to others. So it's really about making sure people feel safe because they have the structure around them. That means they're not worrying about whether they're doing the right things or not, that someone has told them that they're doing the right things, and that means they can focus on doing the things rather than thinking about things. And as you get into stage 2, into counterdependency on fight, we talked about how you need to move more towards coaching. So that's when you're not trying to solve the problems or challenges in the team yourself, but you're trying to coach them into using tools and methods that help them to solve it themselves and develop the way they're working together. And then as you go up further into stages 3 and also in stages 4, this is where you're delegating. So rather than coaching, you're still doing bits of coaching, but what you're mostly doing is handing over responsibility of tasks, responsibility of areas of the business, responsibilities of certain actions or certain parts of the business plan, whatever it might be. You're handing over stuff to the different team members who are most suited to it, who have the most expertise in that area, who want to step up and challenge themselves and take responsibility for it. So you change what the type of leader you become in those stages to being more of almost like a sounding board, and somebody that is almost like an expert guide, I suppose, rather than the person making decisions. Because the leader doesn't necessarily make the decisions in stages 3 and 4. They're part of supporting the group to make decisions collectively, but they're not necessarily the one who's saying, well, I've decided this, so we're going to do that. That only really works in the earlier stages. And if we add another layer on top of this diagram, and if you think about the left-hand side, well, that's the left-hand side on the screen, the left-hand side being the group, and the right-hand side being the leader, and kind of how much space they take up, for want of a better phrase. And you can kind of put a line on it like this, which shows that in the earlier stages, the leader has to take quite a lot of space. So if you look in stage 1, most of stage 1 is fulfilled by the leader in terms of them being active and giving clear instructions and being very present and they're kind of the center almost of the team, and a lot of stuff revolves around them. And as you go up through the stages, the leader steps back further and further. And they never step out completely, but they step back further and further, and they're not necessarily seen as the person to go to about anything necessarily when you get to stage 4. They're just another team member whose role and function in the team is to support the team to be to perform and be productive. So that the style of leadership changes significantly, and this is where it gets really interesting and really difficult for leadership, because you need to understand these different ways to lead, these different styles of leading, and you need to understand when to use them within the team that you're leading. And quite often now you find leaders who are leading multiple different teams. So you might need to be one type of leader with one team and a different type of leader with a different team. And we're only humans, there's only so much we can take, but that's when it can get super confusing and complex about, well, how do I manage that? How do I be the leader that team needs at that point in time, but be the leader that team needs at that point in time? And that can be very, very different ways and approaches to that leadership style. And if you try to delegate when people are in stage 1, it can lead to lots of confusion and things like that, and not getting any performance from the team. And equally, if you try to be quite instructional in stage 4, then you can get a lot of kind of kickback from the team, thinking, well, why are you telling me this? Like, this is not how we work. It doesn't work like this. So it's a really complex and really interesting challenge, and I'm afraid there's no simple answers to it. But I think it's an interesting thing to think about. And for you to think about, so now in my team, whether I'm a leader in the team or not, where is my team in this scale, and what kind of leadership am I currently doing, or is my leader currently doing? And do those things match up in relation to this model on the screen, or is there a bit of a mismatch at the moment?
Great.
Any thoughts, Johanna, or perspectives, or contributions?
Well, a lot. There's a lot of thoughts popping up, but I'm thinking also I see that a lot when we're out in different companies and organizations, both of the extremes. A lot of leaders that's been quite direct and like feel comfortable in giving instructions and really leading, who get a little bit almost like a little mellow and blue sort of when it comes up to people taking their own decisions and being self-organized, sort of almost wanting to push the team down again. But then also I see a lot of leaders who are like, everyone talking about self-organization, and I'm handing it over all the decisions, and I'm trying to give them the power, but they don't want it. And so it's really, like you say, it's a balance and being back and forth. So it's just really, really interesting, and like I say, really complex.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, if I think most people I've asked about, what if I show them this model and I talk about, where's your natural leadership style? Like, if you had to choose, where would you feel most comfortable? And often people talk about, say, delegation. I'm not sure that's always true, but often people say delegation. But then if it is true, if you're naturally a kind of a delegator and like to let other people step up, then you need to work with that to make sure you can be instructional when teams are in earlier stages together. And vice versa. If you're naturally an instruction giver, you need to learn how to step back and walk away from that and support teams in different ways. Otherwise, they're always going to stay in stage one. They will never develop if you're telling them what to do all the time, or if you're not letting them step up and take their own responsibility and make their own mistakes. So it's it's fascinating and complex, and I don't envy anyone having to do this. I've done it a number of times. I don't envy anyone doing it because it's really hard work.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Max. I would like to say for these talks. And based on all of this, I also want to talk a little bit about the week's tasks and workshop that we have for you. So I've told you a little bit about the tasks in the overview video, and it's also in the kits that you have received. But you can look at the tasks that are like a little assignment for the week. It doesn't have to be something that you organize in a big way. You also have the workshops that can be a little bit bigger, but this is something that you can do over a coffee with a couple of coworkers, for an example. And the tasks that we have for you this week that will allow you to go a little bit deeper in this topic as well is to introduce the content and process model that we've been talking about a couple of times during this session, and that you find more about in the learning kit. So looking at how you work, but also what you do. So what tasks do you do, and how do you work together in your team? So grab a colleague or up some people in your team and look a little bit at where do you think that you're putting most of your time? Is it how, or is it in the what? And is there something that you could do differently? Is there another focus that you could try out? Also have a look at the model that Max just introduced to us, and talk to some team members and co-workers. Where do you think that you are in this team, and do you have different views on which steps that you are, and what behaviors and characteristics do you see? And that could lead to a discussion about how you could work to maybe move up a step. We also have a couple of suggested workshops for you to do this week. I'm not going to go through all of them now. You find them all in the workshop library. But this is workshops that you can do that, again, connects back to this topic. And feel free to pick the one that you feel suits the team where you are at the moment in your work. And also feel free to play around with them. This is not something that you have to do exactly the way it says in the workshop library and in the instructions of the different workshops. But you can add things or take some take some stuff away, make them longer, make them shorter. It could be for half an hour, it could be a whole day. I mean, it's up to you to make sure that it makes sense for your learning experience at this point. Some tips for you while you're getting started with this is to start small and gradually shift meeting culture. So it's not about going into your workplace and saying, okay, now we're going to do everything different. We're going to do it like this. But add small things maybe in your morning meetings, or in different workshop settings that you have. It could be just changing the way that you're doing things right now. So if you have a strong meeting culture, maybe you add an element of making it more of like a workshop instead. And pilot and prototype. Try it how do you say it? Multiple time? No. Try it time and time again. Come back to it and try different ways of doing it. If it doesn't work the first time, shift a little bit and do it in a different way. And now I've said a lot of times you can start small. You don't have to make it that big, but you can also, of course, go really big and do a full day workshop. Build a workshop design that fits where you are now and take help from your coworkers as well. You can make it even a series of workshops so that it's something that's reoccurring and comes back. And try to connect it to a challenge that you have now in the team. This will help us to address this issue that we've been talking about. It's also a good way to make sure that people are on board and want to add and contribute. And of course, you can always use this course as an excuse. People really want to help with learning experiences and when you're on a course like this. So just ask, I'm on this course, I need to do a workshop. Would you be able to give me some time? I'm sure that everyone would like to help. A few reminders for you is to complete your reflection journal by Sunday and to post it in your learning group in Slack so that you also have the time to look at each other's and to make some comments. And to really make this this learning journal, or reflection journal, try to make this for you so it's just not a homework thing that you're doing because you have to, but make sure that you take some time and say, what is it that I have learned? And to use the learning groups they have. I've seen that there's already some activities and discussions going on, so please use each other to make sure that you get even longer in this learnings. And share from any of the tasks and workshops that you run. Post pictures, tell us how it's been going, and comment on each other's, both when it's gone really, really well, but also if you feel that you've done some mistakes or this didn't go that well, because that's also when we learn, of course. So a big thank you for now. A really big thank you to you, Max. It's always great discussing these things with you.
It's great to be here, and yeah, I love talking about this stuff, so happy to share.
And we'll see you in the webinar as well. Looking forward to seeing you on the webinar, and take care until then. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.